Question number 2, making sure that we have a clear understanding as a community of these delineated zones. And point number 3, making sure that hot button areas have been properly addressed in this ordinance. Thank you. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Anyone else at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the oral communication at this time. And then we can move on to the study session. We'll get the Seal Beach Municipal Code update on parking from Commander Bowles. I know we're having some technical difficulties, but if everyone can get a copy of the handout from the city clerk, we can kind of go page by page on that. Commander Bowles?
I'll make sure they has the.
Okay.
You want me to pass those out?
We're currently printing more copies, so as soon as the additional copies are available of the PowerPoint, we'll have them. We do have the ordinances, the proposed ordinances here.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager Ingram, Commander Steve Bowles, Seal Beach Police Department. I want to thank you for this opportunity to come here tonight to discuss parking municipal code changes that we are proposing here tonight. It's been quite a journey to get where we are tonight, and as all of you know, and those here in the audience, parking is especially in the coastal areas, it is a hot button issue, and I think we're on, right? We're on that side, to my left. Vanna White. To my left is the presentation. As we started down this road of working with the community and working with our new license plate technology, we had some bumps in the road, and we still have bumps in the road like anything else as we roll out our new technology. But before I introduce Julie Dixon of Dixon Resources, who helped us along the way with this entire new parking permit program, I just wanted to tell you an example of how I believe our city works with our community. As you know, we have license plate readers now that are on our parking vehicles, and no longer are our employees having rotator cuff issues by driving on the opposite side of those the old male Jeeps when I started, and now they're the newer Jeeps, having to mark tires that they're using license plate reader recognition. But what we found was in the First Street lot, the ordinance was required, or does require, that people park head into all the parking spaces. And specifically, the First Street beach lot has the windsurf or surf prepping area that is so beautifully maintained by those that use it. So I got a phone call from a gentleman who sounded to me like represented a lot of the surfers down there, and asked if I could give him an explanation as to why. So I took that opportunity. He was down at the beach. I drove down, and we stood there and kind of looked at the whole area and explained to him that license plate readers are designed to handle our enforcement more efficiently and more effectively. And he said, well, I understand that, but all the cars that are here have front license plates also, but not every state requires front license plates. Arizona, for instance, does not require a front license plate. And so we figured that every state in the union requires the rear plate. But after having further discussion and after reviewing his comments, and then probably the other 100 people that called me after that, it made total sense that we can make that opportunity for them to be able to back into those spaces and unload their equipment out onto the grass instead of out into the parking lot. It seemed to make sense. We made some signage changes. We kept the code, but we made some signage changes allowing that to happen at that location, and everybody's interests were represented and were addressed, and everybody was happy with the outcome. I just like to say that because it's great to have the opportunity when people actually come to us and we can have the discourse about acknowledging the problem, working together to solve the problem, and coming to a mutually beneficial partnership. And I was just everyone was very grateful for that. So I just wanted to give you an example that we do listen, can't always promise the outcomes that everybody wants, but that's an example of us working together and working for a common solution. With that, I wanted to introduce Julie Dixon, who you all know for the last several meetings of our parking study sessions, and she'll be addressing our municipal code changes as well as just some updates on our technology. Thank you.
It's always nice to be greeted with applause. Hopefully you're still applauding when it's all said and done. I also have to comment on what Commander Bowles was sharing about the windsurfers. It was actually thanks to the chief. We were having a parking update, and I think sometimes we get so stuck in the weeds of what the solution is. And it was actually the chief that offered some very good insight and a really great idea on how to solve that problem. So we really appreciated that. So you can tell it is very much a team effort. So thank you all again for having us today. And also thanks to our stakeholders who continue to have such a strong presence here in Seal Beach. And I just really can't emphasize enough how much the community feedback has impacted a lot of what we're going to share here tonight. And I know the type is very small, so I'll try to definitely explain the details of the slide so everybody understands and sees what's on there. In fact, I'll probably have to pull out my glasses for this particular effort. I think everyone knows that this last year has been a year of transformation for the parking experience in Seal Beach. We've really tried to focus on that customer-centric model for making sure that we provide as many opportunities and information to our visitors and to our locals as well. And this transformation to a plate-based solution is something that you will see continue to evolve within the community. Right now, we have all of the beach parking lots really geared towards that license plate-based solution. And I also have to emphasize for everybody here to understand the fact that Seal Beach has a standard of excellence that I have to tell you is very reticent when we talk about this solution, because the vendors told us that they were going to deliver to a certain standard. And I have to tell you that Seal Beach has made sure that they deliver to that standard. And it's really important to highlight that because several communities have just kind of accepted the technology for what it is. But the fact is, and thanks to the police department's involvement, and maybe the fact that they could get arrested if they show up again in Seal Beach, I kid. But the fact is that these vendors have definitely stepped up to the table and actually performed and are continuing to deliver to that standard. And that's something that has really had a ripple effect throughout our industry, because we're really forcing the hands of the vendors to deliver. And I know that that should be a given, but it isn't always the case. So that's something that's required a lot of hand-holding with these solutions. And one of the things that we're really excited about, this whole plate-based solution with the mobile pay, the beach parking lots with the pay-by-plate, is that the next step in this process is to also start to transition into virtual parking permits. Our hope is that the next focus, once we move past kind of our beach parking season, is to now also focus on ways to make the residential parking permits and merchant parking permits more license plate based as well. So I think you're going to see a lot more of those details as we get into this next season as well. I'm also really excited to report on the signage. The signage improvements have been ongoing, and just today, the new library parking lot signs were installed. So I recommend everybody go take a look at them. They look really smart, and they look really clean, and they clearly communicate the message that parking for residential parking, basically after hours, and the rules during the day. And we're really hoping that that's going to have an effect for the library parking, especially during the daytime and for senior center events as well. We have a press release that's going to be coming out with all sorts of the innovations that we're going to talk about here today, and just keeping the general public aware. And I know I'll mention it at the end, but we have our next external stakeholder meeting with the community, and it's been identified for November 29th, and there will be a big announcement about that, and we'll share more about that as we go in. But the primary reason that we're here tonight is to talk about the municipal codes. And this has been an effort that has been ongoing. And what's really important about the codes, as you see in front of you for the draft, is that this is really intended to not only provide updates, but also to make parking management more effective and consistent within your community. There's also an element of what we like to use the term of future-proofing your ordinances as well, so that you're also safeguarded for anything that might possibly come down the pipeline as time goes on. There's a couple of aspects that are tied into here, which number one, deal with oversized vehicle parking, so that we can limit the oversized vehicle parking in the beach lots. I think we all know that our beach lots, while they are large, they're not necessarily large enough to accommodate the oversized vehicles. So one of the aspects that you'll see tied into the rules is limiting the oversized vehicles parking at the beach lots. Also, as Commander Bowles referenced, the requirement for front-end parking only unless posted otherwise. And this is really important because we're trying to make our parking enforcement officers more effective in the field as they seek compliance. And by being able to leverage the license plate recognition technology, which we've installed here within the city, it'll allow them to more effectively and efficiently monitor the rules as you'll see them posted. Another aspect that's tied into the rules are some of the aspects of bringing consistency to the regulations and to the ordinances that tie into making sure that our rates are tied into your annual fee approval. So rather than having anything pre-established or defined within the code, we're actually tying any kind of fees or rates into your annual fee schedule. So that way when council makes reviews for improvements or increases, those tie-ins would all tie into the actual fee schedule rather than being hard-coded into your municipal ordinances. Again, still requiring council approval and review, but again, tying it into that flexibility and agility of when you're doing your fee schedule improvements as well. And we think that that's a really great way of tying it in. There's a couple of other things that have been tied into the codes that we think that are really important. One is allowing for you to utilize the mobile payment features, which provides customer convenience to your visitors and residents and locals, but by allowing you to regulate parking utilizing mobile payment. We've also adapted your taxi zones so that you're really adapting those for TNC, basically rideshare vehicles like Uber and Lyft and others, so that really multi-purposing those zones. And then also allowing for the use of LPR through enforcement, and we think that those are really key tag-ins. Some of the items that already came up during public comment I can go ahead and address too. When we talk about the standardization of your loading zones, this was actually something to bring consistency throughout all of your zones. We wanted to be sure that we were consistent with what the rules, the time limits associated with those zones are, and that's one of the reasons why you'll see some of the editing within those lines, and I think we identified those in the actual staff report as well. A couple other municipal codes that we think are really going to be important, especially in your community, is updating your electric vehicle coding to require active charging is when you can be parked there. It's often an occurrence where folks will store their vehicles, their electric vehicles, in those spaces and leave them there all day. And so this requires that you have to be actively charging your vehicle at that time. And two other ones that we think are really important for Seal Beach, especially as we start to manage parking into the future, is the requirement that we call it the no reparking restriction. You have time limits along Main Street for a reason. We're looking for turnover, vehicle transitions. And so one of the opportunities reviewed today is to establish that you cannot repark within 150 feet of that space until basically after that time limit. So basically, if you were parked in the 2 hours, you can't park within 150 feet of that space for another 2 hours. And this is something that we found has been very effective in communities like yours, especially when we start to talk about, we've had the conversation that's gone back and forth about should we put parking meters on Main Street? Those ideas have been discussed. But one of the ways that we can start to manage initially without paid parking is by implementing this no reparking restriction. What's intended is so that folks will come in, they'll do their business, they'll do their transaction, and then they'll move their vehicle. If they want to park for the all day, they can go to one of our surface lots, like down at the beach lots, where you can park for the all day experience. But what we want to do is we want to promote the use of our commercial zone parking for the short-term visitors, the folks that are coming in, spending their money in our restaurants, spending their monies in our shops. And that's what the no reparking ordinance is intended towards. And this is something that we think is really important because of the fact that From our stakeholders, we've heard a lot of feedback that some of our employees, and in some cases our business owners, are out there just going out there and rubbing the chalk off their tires, or going out there and just rolling from one parking space to the next. And this is intended to proactively address that issue. Also tied in with this is also identifying the ordinance for obstruction of enforcement. Now, while we are going to be using the virtual chalking with LPR, there may still be a parking officer out there on foot with traditional chalk, and this basically prohibits a person from going out there and rubbing the chalk off or trying to eliminate any chalk marks on their vehicle as well. So these are just some of the important rules that we think you need to have in place in order to ensure the parking management resources that we're looking for as we move forward. There's a couple of other items that are tied into the new permit policies. One of those are the fees, just like I was mentioning, is tying the fees for permits into the annual fee schedule review. We've also adjusted the merchant permits to the dates to be consistent with the annual business license renewals, so it again brings some consistency and a little bit more effective management from the administrative side. We've also included the allowance for city council to adjust the number of permits that are allowed, not stating what that number is, but it's basically stating that city council can make that adjustment when and if the time comes and becomes necessary. And also just a formality of assigning the permit purchasing responsibilities to the finance department rather than the administrative services. And just a couple of next steps. I think everybody's aware that we had a pay station vandalized in the springtime. We're working on actually getting that equipment replaced, and we're actually going to be able to reutilize the vandalized equipment. Actually, Commander Bowles identified a great idea of how we can wrap the vandalized meter, and it won't be apparent to folks that it had been damaged, and we'll actually be able to throw that into the 8th Street parking lot, which we're really excited. 8th Street, yeah, I said it right. 8th Street lot, because that'll provide where we have the most demand, and so we're looking at doing that over the next few months. I mentioned our next stakeholder meeting will be on November 29th, and we're continuing to work on the signage and expanding that program, and as I mentioned, the transition into virtual parking permits over this next year is also one of our mission statements of what we're working towards. And with that, I am available for questions.
Okay, thank you. I know we're not adopting the ordinance tonight, we're just talking about issues and comments and stuff like that, so.
Correct.
Just to make that clear. So do anyone have any questions?
Julie, if I get a ticket, could you walk me through what, okay, so I don't want to pay it. I
Sure.
don't think I should have gotten it. Walk me through what it'll look like.
Absolutely. So on your parking citation, there's information on there for how to appeal, or what we also use the term adjudicate your parking citation. There's a website where you can go online and you can fill out your reason for why you want your ticket reviewed and why you think it should be dismissed. You can also provide attachments. So maybe you have some photographs or some images or some supporting documentation to state, you know, for example, you were at the beach lot and you said you had a valid ticket, and so you provided your proof of payment. That could be an attachment. And then what happens is that your citation goes for what's called first level review. And so that first level review is something where you look for the basics, like maybe the citation had been issued in error, you had a valid ticket, or possibly you entered in the wrong character on your license plate. There could be all sorts of reasons. Typically, those are the types of user errors or, like, you know, dismissed in the interest of justice that would happen. But let's just say they say, no, I'm sorry, this is your third ticket, we're upholding that citation. Sure.
Who is they?
Oh, the police department, actually.
Okay, so it's right now we have a third party.
Third-party vendor that processes, but for the first level, so there's 2 levels of review at the first one. One is just straight administrative error. It clearly was a citation that should not have been issued. It was issued to the wrong license plate, factors like that. And I have to tell you, there's tracking on all of these citations too. Anything that was voided or dismissed, there's a reason code associated with it and who took that action as well. But first level reviews done by the police department to determine whether or not that citation should proceed forward, etc. Let's just say they say, I'm sorry, this is your third parking citation for the same reason, we're upholding it. And so then you can actually go for what's called a second level review, and you can resubmit all the same paperwork. It can all be done electronically. And then there's an independent adjudicator that actually reviews, an independent hearing officer that reviews those case files and makes that decision ultimately whether or not your ticket is upheld or not upheld.
So is that another company then that it goes to?
So in this case,
the
it's an
third
independent
party.
hearing officer. That's actually, in our case, it's retained by data ticket contracts with them, or you don't pay for them directly, right? They pay, sorry, I had to clarify. The city actually hires an independent hearing officer so that the city contracts for, but they're definitely an independent adjudicator that reviews the file.
And then what happens?
So let's just say you get a notice that says, I'm sorry, but your ticket's upheld. Ultimately, you can go to small claims court. It doesn't happen very often, but ultimately the case, you can file a small claims action in court. What happened about, a long time ago, about 30 years ago, I guess it was. I'm getting really old. The parking citations went from basically criminal infractions to civil citations. So if you want to take it to, say, a third level or the next action, you'd actually have to actually file a small claims action against the city.
Okay, so the city manager really never comes into the picture on,
I mean, there's always exceptional situations where I know the city manager probably gets phone calls for lots of items. So I would imagine that the city manager would probably get a phone call or two on this particular item. But overall, if the ticket needs to be appealed, it needs to go through that chain
I
of
mean,
command.
she's not in a chain of command on
No.
okay.
No, it's just often, like I said, some folks try to drag the city manager into the discussion, but the adjudication process, how it works, is basically the steps that I described.
I
Okay.
think the reference to the city manager in the ordinance is that the city manager approves the procedures that are in place for the third-party review, but it's only an approval of general procedures. The city manager's not in the appeal process.
Right.
So where do we find those?
So it actually falls under the vehicle code is actually the governing, I'll call it rule. So it comes under the vehicle code in terms of how parking citations are processed and handled by each jurisdiction, so.
All right, so what does the city manager have to do with that if it's by state?
I believe it's what the city attorney was referencing is the contracting mechanism.
It's just the process of how level one review occurs and who does it and who.
Okay, so that process that
just a-
Julie
it's just
just
a-
explained would be either approved or disapproved or something else recommended in place of that. But the city manager is not in the business of reviewing the parking citations.
That's correct. In every city, the management of the city, the management of the police department, and the elected officials are out of the
Yeah,
appeal
that's
process
a
because it's
pretty
an
good idea,
independent-
especially for the electeds.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to ask is, in this document, which I know we're not adopting tonight, we need to do some work on it, one of the main reasons that this entire committee got started was to get parking equity throughout Old Town in the same way. To get it so that it made sense to residents, they knew where to park, and everybody had access to all-day parking, and everybody had access to one-hour parking. I know that you've said we have to go to coastal, but I've been working on this for 10 years.
Right.
I'm termed out, I'm leaving. So where are we on this?
I'm going to defer to the finance director just to see if she wants to provide an update, and then I'll also add some commentary.
Oh, thank you very much, Julie, Councilwoman Deaton, or Mayor Pro Tem Deaton. So specifically for the Coastal Commission, I think Julie is deferring to me about the application that we have for the paid parking in the beach lots. From a perspective of the parking signs, and I am going to ask Crystal to jump in here during this conversation as well, the signage cannot easily be changed without going to the Coastal Commission because limiting parking on surface streets where there are currently no parking restrictions limits access to the beach per the definition of the Coastal Commission. I believe that's a true statement. And because of that, any change in parking restrictions, time-limited parking on any of the streets that are not currently marked would require a Coastal Commission application. And there has been no application for making those changes to the parking restrictions in the Old Town area.
So that's my question. I've been working on this for a very long time, and I don't know why we don't have an application yet.
I think in doing the research, now this is just me kind of answering your question off the cuff, but doing the research, there was an application that the city actually completed in, I want to say maybe the late 80s or early 90s. I don't remember for sure. But that application, and maybe it was the 90s, was actually about adding parking meters on Main Street and doing the time-limited restrictions in the other areas of the city. And the Coastal Commission actually categorically denied the time-limited restrictions in the other part of the city. Interestingly enough, the Coastal Commission approved the meters on Main Street, and at that time, the city actually bought the meters because they were planning on moving forward, and then we know what happened after that, and we used the meters that were purchased as stock to replace the other meters as they went out. But I know that for a fact that there has previously been an application made by the city specifically requesting additional time-limited parking on other streets outside of what we currently have, and the Coastal Commission did not approve it.
Okay, so we know that. We've kind of we've journeyed in that direction. We had another consultant prior to Dixon Consulting coming on who disagreed and said we didn't need to have Coastal Commission approval, so that set us back for a while. So then we brought Dixon on, who said, yes, we do need it. And Julie, how long have you been on contract?
Just under, I think we're right at a year, actually. So, and I have one positive note to share with you. The
so
I want to
She
be.
is so good.
I try. The California Public Parking Association is actually going to be hosted in about a week and a half at LAX. And I was just talking to Commander Bowles about this, is that, so I was in Monterey last week. We rallied their interest because they have the same issue that you have as well. Not you, the city has. But we've also rallied from the San Diego port basically all the way up the coastline. And we're actually going to create, and I think we've talked about this before, and this is the perfect forum to do it. We're going to form a parking coastal commission subcommittee where we can rally the representatives from all of the cities that are affected by the same challenge. And what we thought we could do is by rallying all of the municipal resources, that we could come up with a consolidated approach to, I don't want to use the word tackling, but approaching Coastal Commission and try to bring some consistency to process, procedure, protocol, so that we can actually try to address the exact challenges that you're identifying. I can share, only because of the fact that I work with a few other beachside communities, that this is a challenge that we face across the board, but everybody's trying to deal with it individually. And so the thought had been, and I know Commander Bowles has been working with some of the neighboring agencies too, is that we could try to bring the whole group together and see if we can rally it up. And that was the intention, to take advantage of this conference that's coming up in LA. So.
Okay, so in the 8 years that I've been on council, the problem has become much more complicated now.
Absolutely.
So the longer we take in trying to tackle this, the worse it gets. Now we have oversized vehicles parking on the streets overnight, and it's really becoming a problem. And I did not want this committee to completely lose focus and go into laser reading license plates and meters and all of the places that we've wanted to go without remembering why we got started. So, anyway.
I can assure you it's on our mission objectives, and it's definitely not something that's being overlooked. It's also, as you know, it's kind of a behemoth that we need to try to figure out how to strategically tackle. And that was the thought about the way that we could actually form a unified front in trying to tackle the needs for your community in particular. And it was actually even further motivated, like I said, when I was in Monterey last week, and some of the feedback that we received from them, and that initiative to just really pick up the ball and run with it. And I know that the commanders had several engagements just with neighboring communities too, so we think that this is ripe for it, only because I kind of hear the pain and suffering across the coastline. And so the thought was, again, that unified approach, that we think we can make a difference. I will give you my commitment that I will not let this drop. And I said, aside from whether or not we're in Seal Beach or not, this is an issue, like I said, that faces several communities that we work with. So whatever we can do to try to help rally that, I'm also trying to leverage the CPPA being the Public Parking Association for California to try to also get their legislative support behind this group as well. So there's several factors that'll tie into this really from that comprehensive approach too, so.
Well, I know that Councilwoman Masa-Labott and I went to a group that was up and down the coast looking at coastal problems. It certainly worked for us with our state lands agreement. So I believe that you can have success with that, but please don't forget, that's how we got started.
I would actually love to leverage you in the case of after we have this initial meeting, if we need any kind of, leadership spokes level type of aspect, I'd love to be able to tag back to you to be able to leverage that as well,
I'm
because
here.
that's great. I will take advantage of that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Council members, Sestarsi?
Yeah, I had a question. I just want to make sure I was understanding. Last year, the city council voted to increase the fees in the beach lots, and that, I understand, has been in coastal commission for approval. My question was, you mentioned that the fees would go into the fee schedule and could be changed. How does that work?
All that it really does is take the flexibility for when you are allowed to increase the fees. It would be tied into the fee schedule rather than tied into your ordinances. So that, like your parking on Main Street, factors like that as well. So, because not everything is necessarily tied to it, but all of your parking, basically anything that has to do with rate structures, as long as it's allowed, it would be tied to your fee schedule. Just it wouldn't be hard-coded into your ordinances.
And I would like to just jump in there and add some additional clarification. Everything that Julia said is correct. This specific example in the municipal code was that the hourly rate that we could charge for parking on Main Street was written into the code.
Right.
Oh,
And so we are taking that reference to that pricing out of the code and now going to move it into the fee schedule that's adopted each year. So we can change we could have two-tier parking rates for the hourly rates on Main Street. That would not have to go to Coastal Commission. That's just something that we can adjust every year. And reality is, if the city had each year incrementally increased the day rate at the beach lot, we wouldn't have needed to go to Coastal Commission either. But because it's outside of Coastal Commission's parameters, that's what required the permit to have to be applied for. So by moving it out of the municipal code into the cost recovery schedule, we can make incremental adjustments and include perhaps seasonal pricing for the lots on Main Street and those kinds of things without having to do anything except have it be considered by the council.
so if we wanted to, like Huntington Beach has a discount for residents or senior, we could work without having to go all the way.
Correct, without needing to change a municipal
Okay,
code.
thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Councilmember Moore?
just real quick, one area of my district is behind these condos on Montecito. I was wondering if she could look at that for an idea. There's not enough parking for the condos on Montecito, and they park in the Rossmore area, and that causes an issue. So I wonder if you could just take a quick look.
And we can
offer
add that to the list, Councilmember Moore. Since our conversation at the Ayers Hotel, I've actually had another follow-up conversation with the county, and they have looked at it, and right now, it's not likely that a change can be made because the street is not wide enough to accommodate diagonal parking and two-way traffic. But I ask the question virtually every time I see the CEO of the county.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just had a couple of quick questions. First, I wanted to say thank you, Commander Bowles, for the flexibility on First Street. It really made a big difference. I got a number of calls on that, and I appreciate the openness and flexibility to that, because people that use that lot, they have their ways of getting in and out, and they've been doing it for years, and to change it up just because of different meter reading makes a big difference to them. So I really appreciate that, and wanted to thank you for that. What about the new cars that don't have license plates? And I've noticed, like, my neighbors don't have license plates for like 6, 9, 12 months at a time. Do they get read, or how's that How do you do that? Or how do you
Sure.
read that? Or,
So technically, it doesn't take that long to get a plate. We know
I've
that.
noticed that, but
Let's
it
just
does
highlight
take-
that. So what ends up happening is there is still a manual aspect to the LPR. And we've actually had we have a very active parking enforcement crew who gives us a lot of feedback. I have to let you know that. But the fact is that in some cases, they will have to get out and validate the VIN. And the VIN number, just so everyone in the audience knows, you're never got a get out of jail free card because that VIN number, the vehicle identification number, is the identifier on that vehicle. So even without a license plate, we can reference the VIN number to be the vehicle identifier. So the time limits would still apply. They still can register for a permit. There's all sorts of different steps that go through the process, but the parking rules still apply whether or not you have paper plates or not, so.
And also, just to jump in there, when they go up to a pay station, it says enter the vehicle license plate or the first 8,
So I think, yeah,
the first four of the VIN.
yeah. Last four.
okay. Yeah, I lived in Old Town for a while, and I remember the meter person with their arm swinging around. And,
Sure.
And the only thing I think is you lose a certain human touch to the whole process. And I think, as residents, we appreciate, having that meter person, hanging out, and you kind of get to know them after they give you a number of tickets and go by your house. So, now someone's going to be locked in a car, there's going to be a camera, and they're going to be, they never stop. So I don't know.
Well, that's why we had to keep the chalking piece in there, because they will still have the opportunity to get out of the vehicle as well. And I think that you'll also find that just because there are exceptions to the rules, like you said, paper plates, for example, we have visitor passes in our residential neighborhoods, there's still that human element. And I think that that's the reason why when I mentioned the customer-centric solution, I think all of our parking enforcement officers, and I mean just the PD throughout, the whole community-oriented policing approach, I think that comes from that whole compliance opportunity.
Right, and that's the one factor that our police are so approachable anyway, so we can deal with that. I also had a comment from a resident about the parking around St. Anne's Church and the Zoder overload. I know Vicki got that, so I know you're looking
She
at
did,
that.
she shared that, yes. I think it's one of those ones that we'll definitely take another look at too, to see if there's anything that we can do to try to help provide alternatives or ways that we can try to, again, make it a little bit more efficient. So I think the opportunity with some of the things that we're doing with the library signage, this could also be something that we might be able to consider, but something that we'll definitely look at.
And I also know at the McGaw Elementary School, at certain times of day, and at least in the beginning of the semester, it's more busy, if you will, at that time, because the parents are a little bit
Sure.
more eager to get their kids, but just someplace to look at too.
There's
so.
always that learning curve too at the beginning of the school year as well, so definitely.
All right.
I just have one more comment. I want to bounce off of the mayor's personal touch and what I saw about 2 weeks ago. The parking people were coming down because it was street sweeping, and somebody came in their cart and cut them off, got out and started screaming at them. So that's, that's part of the
That's the human
human touch. So
wanna-
thank you to the parking people.
I want to elaborate on a couple things. The license plate readers, well, in the world of parking, it's so diverse. So in some cities, it's public works. In some cities, it's community development. In some cities, it's its own parking authority, administration. Some, it's police. So as I've networked over the last couple of years and really gotten into the weeds in parking, I'd be in a room where there's no other law enforcement people altogether. But one of the nice parts about the license plate readers too is that it does serve as a force multiplier for us. So all those plates are being scanned in, just like the license plate readers on our police cars. So so if in fact there is a crime that occurs also, and we have a partial license plate, we can go back into that database. So it does serve as not just a parking enforcement tool, but it also serves as a force multiplier for our investigators and for our patrol officers. And one nuance why I have this captive parking audience, one of the things that we found also are license plates and people, what they do to evade license plate readers. And I'll share this with the group because it's not a secret, but you'll see them now as you drive around, but you'll see the white California license plates and you'll see it could be 1 ABC 123, and you'll see a gray area all the way around the entire, just that section of letters and numbers. And people take a Brillo pad and scratch off that reflective coating. So when they go through the toll roads or they look for license plate readers, it doesn't show. It'll show a blank space. I say that not to encourage you, but I say that because we are enforcing altered license plates. And I had in the sense of true disclosure, I had a gentleman come to the front counter who happens to be a United Airlines pilot. And he said, I have had this car for 20 years, like the first year the white California plates came out, and that license plate was pretty beat up. But the car was beat up also. He uses that as his airport car. And we wrote a ticket for an altered license plate. We've been working, our staff, we appreciate my staff identifying that, but the condition of the license plate similar to that of the car. So we kind of took that in consideration and took the ticket back. But there are new cars with that blanked out numbers, and it's clearly done with intent. So one of the parts of the press release will be just to remind you that we will cite for that violation, and that will be required to get new license plates. And the last item too, for me, working with St. Anne's Church, my mom happens to be on the funeral ministry there, so my mom will call me and tell me that there's going to be a funeral and if we can help out with parking. And any church or any services that people have, they know to call us, and we are a common sense parking administrators. I take that personally when people don't give us the chance to make things right. So if there are events, or if there's we have an issue coming into the Pacific Inn that it was going to require some parking assistance, we're here to help people. We want their parking experience to be good. We want our residents to also feel that they can come to us. We had people call and say, I was in the hospital, I got a parking ticket, I was in the hospital. Of course, we'll take care of those things. I just want to reaffirm the fact that it's not all about the enforcement. We are common sense, and we would just ask the community just to work with us. If you have an issue, please reach out.
Right, I appreciate
Okay, thank
that.
you, sir.
Could I comment on that, on the St. Anne's? I think that Mike and I both got the same letter, and it's, the issue is the softball games, using the St. Anne's lot and double parking on both sides of the street and looking for an answer there. The letter itself had somewhat of an idea in it, which I had also talked about earlier in our committee meeting. I think it deserves being looked at.
Absolutely.
Because they really have an issue.
That's an ongoing issue, obviously, having that, those are longtime institutions there that have been coexisting, and so we have to we'll find a solution there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone else?
Just let me comment on the draft ordinance here. I found that I haven't really read it. Tonight's the first time I saw it. The issue with the city manager on appeal, it doesn't say that at all in here. And it's under C, administrative hearing elements, and it's number 3. And it only says that the city manager will provide procedures established by using the agency and approving the regulations. It doesn't say anything else about the city manager.
I think it was item E. Item E did on
Under what section?
8.15.085, parking and oversized vehicles.
What page? Oh, there's no page number.
Doesn't have a page number in mine.
You were talking about 8.25.050, the
Under
review
appeals.
process? Yeah.
Is that the 4th page on the?
Yeah.
backside?
Page numbers really help.
Yeah, we'll make sure those get added. Thank you.
Page.
Who wrote this, by the way?
Some people way before us.
Pardon me?
Yeah,
I
some-
mean, it was staff wrote this ordinance?
Staff wrote the red line are the recommended changes that staff has done, but prior administrations well before us,
I get
because
that.
the last time this was written was a long time ago.
Yeah, okay.
And I may have misread.
I still don't see it, but in any case.
So this will come before us,
Yeah,
and we can,
at the next meeting, or
another meeting, I'm not
maybe
sure
we can
how
just
how
talk more
soon, but
about the
sooner than later,
ordinance
right?
itself at the next study session?
Well, this item is scheduled for consideration for the next meeting, which is in November.
The November 29th meeting? Is
No,
it- No.
this is consideration at the council meeting. The next council meeting is November 13th. So our plan is to have this come for first reading to the city council at that November 13th meeting. And that will be then the community meeting will be on the 29th, and then this, if we, I believe we have to do a second reading, that would be the meeting in December for the second reading.
November 12th, okay. All right.
Okay, well, after seeing this E, I need to ask you again, because it does look like the city manager is involved with appeals. And I understand it's our designee, and what you're telling me is it's been designated and that's the process, but I think this is very unclear if that's what we intend.
We'll take a look at all of those areas where the city manager is considered, because it was my understanding that in the particular one that you're looking at was only for the parking of oversized vehicles. And we used to have a program where the police
special
department would
permits.
issue permits, special permits for oversized vehicles for parking on the street. And because there's no adjudication process for those permits, I believe that's why it would have come to the city manager for appeal.
Both of those sections that were referred to specifically have to do with those exceptional permits or exceptional parking rules. One is for truck parking and one is for oversized vehicles.
Right.
And that's the reason why I think that the term appeals in this case, which was obviously incorporated from the
Okay.
historical document, I think that might be the point of confusion, is just in regards to this process. This is not about a parking citation in this case. It's about the decision involving that permit. So I think that that's the important, when you read that word about the decisions involving the permit, this has nothing to do with a parking citation. That's in that later section.
Okay,
So the
got it.
questions that you had asked earlier, this is specifically the appeals process regarding a parking permit for those special permits. And I think all we did was enhance the ordinance by adding a city manager or designee, so that if you all decide that this becomes a bigger issue and the city manager has too many other duties, you can obviously assign another person for that. But I think that that's the case in this particular one, so.
Okay, so you'll review that and get the language right?
We'll make sure.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
I'd like to just add one thing, just real quick about the revenue. So since we've had the deployment of the new pay stations and of the mobile app Passport, it's interesting to see how the payments have changed. So about 80% are credit card now. So we're really only seeing a very small portion that's cash and coin. And then of that 80%, already about 10% of the payment use is through the Passport application. So we've seen a significant shift in how the revenue is being collected and how the parkers are paying. And I think it's a really great sign, and would highly encourage anybody who's coming to park in the city of Seal Beach to download the Passport parking app and make sure that that parking is taken care of ahead of time, and you don't even have to worry about it. And if you change your mind, other than in the lots on Main Street, you can add time without having to go back up and feed the machine. So thank you.
Has there been an increase in revenue with the new system?
I want to say gut, there will be, because of the fact that people no longer are sharing tickets. where it's the permits, that they paid for all day. It's really too soon to tell, because we've just really been through the first summer, and we haven't quite finished a year, but I would say, generally speaking, yes, we will see an increase in the paid parking in the beach lots.
And we'll look to do some revenue comparisons. We've actually been tracking revenue on a weekly basis with the breakdown that the finance director mentioned. So we'll be sure to bring some of that information for the comparables. And I also want to mention off of what Commander Bowles said too, is with the utilization of the technology, and I will say coming soon, because I know we're working on parking enforcement resources, we're looking at a new deployment schedule as well. That will take consistent deployment through 7 days a week and into the evening hours. And so it's still a little bit early to talk about that, but we've actually been working on that. And I know we're working on resources associated with that so that we can actually extend and expand the compliance and the operation of the services too. So some of that will come as a result of the use of the technology, but definitely that hands-on customer-centric approach, I can't highlight how important it is. And what the commander was sharing too about the plates, I have to tell you, when I say that level of excellence, and we've been working in detail with DMV on this issue that no other agency has introduced, but that's how, like, into the details of making sure that we're operating really at the full capacity. And so we're actually almost pushing DMV at a certain level as well too. So, but we want to make sure the community understands that if you do receive a warning notice for an altered or damaged plate, to definitely take that to DMV to get your plate swapped out, because it is, I think, a $93 parking citation and it's not correctable. So we don't want to go out there and issue $93 parking citations. We'd rather have people get notice, know that they should go and get their plates replaced before they receive a citation like that. So just on that note, I always like to put that extra added in, is to allow people to be proactive to address that.
Will we be giving warnings ahead?
We are actually, and it's something we're working actually with the enforcement officers to even put a little notice, not even just the warning notice, but even additional information, so that that way we can try to help inform the public. So as much education as we can put out there, and as much as we can spread the word, and please don't go out, as the commander said, and don't go alter your plates, because it's a really expensive ticket, so.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. We'll adjourn this meeting till 7 o'clock tonight. You're welcome to come back then. Thank you.